Um, my name is Felipe Medina. I'm father of three. I always have that as my forefront presentation because it's what I'm engaged in the most, and it's a lot of what gives sense to the work that I do in terms of providing means and processes for us to find ways in which we can co-evolve with nature. Um, that's it at a glimpse. There's different elements to that, but this notion of co-evolution is much at the center of the work that we do right now. Yeah. Well, there's one thing that's vivid uh, quite a lot in this recent year, and it's a work we're doing around family empowerment towards sustainability, basically. Mm. How we conceive it is that families are sort of the initial social cell, and it's the place where culture is renovated, and it's in that sense it's sort of the forefront of evolution. You know, the consciousness of the future generations is nested in families, and I feel there's been a lot of abandonment in terms of families taking intentionality for the sort of approach they take in life. So we're working with families. It's right now in quite an experimental phase in how to create processes of co-learning through which families can become strengthened and empowered to be more coherent in the way that they interact with each other, with themselves, and with nature. So that's one side. Um, I'm dressed in this fancy suit today because I have a meeting with this other branch of the work that we're doing, and it's work we do with companies. And sort of the big frame within this work is we're working in innovation towards sustainability from a social point of view. Um, More and more after working with companies for some years, it's becoming evident this state of crisis that companies are facing that's rooted in the way in which humanity is undermined in these companies. And and I feel that people are realizing this and are realizing that they have their time, their days counted, that this way of operating in companies will not go much longer, and it's not very functional within living systems, and it's not very functional or very responsible towards nature, and nature not only understood as in nature outside, but human nature. So I'm leaning into working with the human component in companies and finding ways in which these wonderful sort of fruits of human engineering, which are enterprises. You know, there's such a cleverness to how enterprises work. It's been, you know, centuries of people thinking how to do that. How we can use that cleverness, but put it into service to something that really serves nature in its sort of wholesome definition of nature. So that's sort of another branch of the work. And there's a third branch which has to do with deep ecology and peace work. And this is the project that we've been doing sort of for the last 5 years. It started between this very synchronic coincidence of events that brought together a Dutch woman that was educated with Joanna Macy, that was interested in working in peace here in Colombia, and combined that with the work of this very admirable priest, which right now is working in the sort of in the restoration of truth within the peace conflict, and it sort of tossed me along in this sort of special coincidence of people, and we started working creating processes of reconnection to nature that could support process of reconciliation and empowerment for people who had been close to war. So these were often war victims, a lot of war victims. There were environmental leaders, there were social leaders, and we ended up working with people that were either part of the guerrilla or the paramilitary. And this was it's still very much at the heart of sort of the intentionality behind the work, especially in this political context here in Colombia. And it speaks of sort of the importance of having an inner peace agreement with nature before there being an outer peace agreement possible between humans. Sort of we believe, or rather say I believe that peace is the result of being in good terms with life's equilibrium, and that there is sort of a system that supports this, and it's a system of nature, and that once this is acknowledged and this is fostered, then peace between humans becomes much more probable. So that's the third branch of the work we were doing. Well, I feel that what they share mainly, it's a common principle, and it has to do a lot with the conception of this whole vision of deep ecology. And basically what this principle points to is to the sense that we as humans are not separated at all from nature, and that rather than speaking in terms of conservation or in terms of protecting nature out there, we give importance to this very beautiful phrase. I forget who says it by, but it's of having an ecological reclamation of self, of remembering that we're also nature, and that nature speaks in human terms through us, and that this leads to this whole psychological shift happening when we feel that we are part of something bigger, and that the place that we have within this larger system, it's a very important place. And when we neglect this place, there's an abandonment, and then there's a disequilibrium. But if we can value the place that we have in nature, and if we can sort of receive the wonderful gift of life that we have to be present right now, and sort of come into a place of gratitude through which we can then act in responsibility. I think that's the main common thread, and I feel that there's a lot of beauty in there, in the sense that often all these pressures that we're feeling right now in this moment in time, in terms of pollution and social injustice and whatnot, I often come into this notion that these are sort of this rather loving pushes from the natural system for us to regain a consciousness and sort of confront ourselves to how we've understood ourselves in life, and come to an evolved sense of who we are in the planet. So it's very exciting. I have no idea what happens. This is another thing that's coming in all the work. I have no idea. I mean, I have no idea what can happen, and this is what makes it exciting to see that when conditions are allowed, and when sort of this nature is trusted to work through us, then there are these inner revelations, simple moments where a father recognizes, the love that he has for his child, and how much he's been abandoned her because of thinking of these budgets and things. These glimpses of the human heart being touched by the gift of life and choosing to respond to that in a place of gratitude and responsibility. Those are sort of like the common threads in the work. Yeah. I mean, I think that the etymology of education is something that's very something that's very straightforward that we often forget, no? And I don't remember the exact words, but it has to do with bringing forth something that's within, giving light to something that lies within. And I think really that's the center of all education, no? I think there's so much knowledge present in all of us. There's centuries of co-evolution, and there's this whole natural intelligence that's so ingrained in our system, and in a sense it's very wired towards life, and this becomes often discredited with this other notion of knowledge of facts and figures and sort of this construction of culture. And I think the construction of culture is valid, but it must be remembered that this is something that is renovated daily, and that part of our responsibility to culture is to become active actors of this renovation. And this can be renovated. We can tap into these inner sources and sort of bring into expression something that feels true in relation to what we perceive in life. And that's another aspect that is important to take into account in education, and it's something that we often found in working with these workshops, especially with indigenous people and things like this. And it's the sort of to having a straight front openness to the diversity through which truth expresses itself, and that allows for that permits that we give value to our own unique expression of that truth, and see it as part of a larger picture, that it's not the only part, but it's a part that's needed in order to complete sort of the ecosystem of perspectives. So this sort of valuing this genuine perception and this genuine sense of self, and to see that as something that's legitimate. I think this is very important in education, to create spaces where this feels safe, and out of that comes another aspect of education, which is co-learning, and it's how can we learn from these different perspectives and see them as something that can complete and sort of give feedback and provide other frames of reference to our own experience. But there is not a notion of competition in terms of what is more valid, but there's a sense of complementary, of so there's these two things, and then finally the last one is I think sort of the embodiment of education is very important, and to see sort of the whole human body as an organism that's capable of learning, and that learning becomes functional when it is permeated in the whole organism. It cannot be only something that refers to the mind. Mind is important, but there's other parts of the body that are equally important. So sort of giving this embodiment to the education allows for there to be a vessel through which information and intentionality can find functional channels. Yeah. I've been thinking about sustainability since you guys asked me if we could do this interview, and I've been thinking about this word, how to understand it. And I feel that it's very important sort of to deepen and question what what is the force behind this concept, no? Um, so again, like with working with companies and whatnot, this aspect of sustainability is conceived a lot in terms of reducing the damage, and I think this is valid, of course, but there isn't enough of a vital force sometimes within this conception to undergo the changes that are necessary, no? And then in thinking how to understand this, I came across this notion that comes from James Lovelock, who's the sort of the scientist that created Gaia theory. And it was very confronting to me when I heard it. And what he said was basically that how he viewed it, human beings can either add qualitative value to the web of life or perish. That's how he viewed it. Either you serve evolution through the particular expression that nature has within you, and you add value in terms of quality to nature, or sort of you lose your pace. And I see that this gives another angle to sustainability, and it sort of makes it a more vital question in terms that I think there's a lot of life and of movement that can happen when we as humans question ourselves, how can we add quality to the web of life? Yeah? How can we make things even better? How can we? What is our particular gift that we can give to nature and support sort of its life dynamic? And so in this sense, it makes it a very challenging and exciting and creative question, and from the macrocosm to humanity's role to the microcosm. What is my gift? How can I add value to this gift of life? And I feel in looking at it like this, sort of we come across this other phrase by this. I think it's this psychologist, it's Robert Keegan, that says how can we stop solving problems, and how can we allow the problems to solve us? So how can we stop seeing this whole challenges as a problem that we need to solve, sort of that we can keep things together and sort of maintain, but we can see how can this really unravel our potential and sort of bring forth an expression of humanity that is needed, that is incarnated, that is it's a very exciting question. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. We have luminous.